the new podcast brought to you by Aaron Bowinkle. Hopefully you like to hear what I have to say, because otherwise this would be a fruitless endeavor. But if you like sports, you like random pop culture references, and with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump off with episode 1 of I've Got Things to Say. Topic number 1, it's going to be 5 things I learned this season that the postseason helped confirm and or validate. Who amongst us doesn't like being validated? So, topic number 5, which is probably actually my most controversial topic, so I don't know if I actually segmented this best, but I do think that this was one of the easier ones for me to watch, at least from an eye test standpoint, but it will be the one that I'm probably going to murder for the most. Dwight Howard is the 3rd best center in the NBA at the moment. Yes, I said it. Yes, I believe it. Yes, I know he's going to get maxed out. Yes, I saw the All-NBA team. No, Tim Duncan's not a center. He is possibly the greatest power forward to ever play the game, but he doesn't get to be involved in this conversation. So anybody that's automatically getting worked up by what I just had to say does not get to use that as an argument. Centers, true pivot big men. Number 1, Marc Gasol. Number 2, Joakim Noah. Number 3, Dwight Howard. Now, granted, that's my own subjective perspective, but I think the playoffs helped prove exactly what I have to say. And no, Brook Lopez doesn't get to be in the argument, because I would like to point out that Joakim Noah, my number 2, advanced past Brook Lopez with a far inferior cast of talent. I do like Brook Lopez. I do think, but he's probably the Tara Reid of the NBA. Nice to look at when we're caught up in the moment, but 15 years from now, we're going to be wondering what the hell we were thinking. 20 years from now, we're going to be explaining to our kids who he was. The 3 guys that I'm high on, or at least that are at least on this list, Gasol's number 1. Now, I know he's the trendy pick. I know that's not exactly, I'm not revamping anything or shaking up the world by picking Marc Gasol right now. And I do think that people actually overrate him a little bit in feeling that he's not a dominant presence. But if I were to start a team and I was picking a center, he'd be my number 1 guy. He was Defensive Player of the Year this year, although somehow anybody explained to me how he was 2nd team All-NBA defense as the Defensive Player of the Year. I would think that would warrant you being the best player at your position. But Lord knows I don't really ever understand how the NBA picks any of this stuff. Tony Parker was 2nd team point guard this year, and no offense to Tony Parker, but I don't think he's the 2nd best point guard in the NBA. I think he's an underrated point guard in the way we view him. But personally, I think Kyrie Irving probably had a better year than he did. But I digress. Let's get back to the topic at hand. Let's just look at the stats from this year. Gasol, not really a dominant offensive player, but part of that has to do with the way that Memphis plays the game. They're not a high-scoring team. They like to impose themselves defensively. He helps cater to that. But 14.1 points per game, 7.8 rebounds per game, 1.7 blocks per game. Pretty nice. One of the bonuses from him is you get 4 assists per game, 49% from the field, and 85% from the free throw line. That means at the end of the game, you can't foul this guy. He's clutch. He's money. How many guys do that? How many centers in the NBA are going to even shoot over 65%? Which, of course, is going to tailor into what I'm going to talk about with Dwight Howard, but we'll get to that later. But those are nice numbers, and those are really nice numbers for a team in the Western Conference Finals. Now, I know they got a little lucky because they got to meet OKC without Russell Westbrook, but still, the guy had to perform. He had to perform against a guy in Kendrick Perkins, who's supposedly a good defensive player, although I don't even understand how Kendrick Perkins is in the NBA anymore. That's another story. But Gasol's a really, really good player, and more importantly, from the eye test, which is what I'm basing at least this argument on in a lot of ways, because the numbers don't always hold up for what I'm talking about, but they will in some standpoints. His teammates like playing with him. he makes his teammates better. His rebounds are down, and part of that is because he plays with Zach Randolph. He is the lowest rebounder of the three guys I'm talking about. But in the season that he did not play with Zach Randolph, he averaged, give me a second here because I got the numbers here somewhere, 9.3 rebounds per game. That's 1.5 more rebounds than he has right now. Zebo eats the boards up, and once, that's what happens. Guy's not going to get the same amount of rebounds, and he's not a selfish player. He doesn't care about his stats. You can tell in how he plays the game. You can tell about how his approach to the game is. He and his brother are both that way. Personally, I'd actually take Mark over Powell right now, but once again, getting off topic, don't mean to do so. Now, Noah, who I've got at number 2, I feel comfortable doing this because I don't think that if you put Dwight Howard on that same Bulls team, they get past the Nets this year. And you could argue with me that maybe they would, and I know that Howard helped take some Orlando Magic teams that weren't exactly the most talented in the NBA kind of deep in the playoffs, including getting to the finals, but he had a better cast of characters. Hedo Turkoglu was better than just about anybody that the Bulls had during the postseason run. Luol Deng, I'll take over just about any of those Magic players because I think Luol Deng's a really underrated swingman, but he wasn't available. Spinal Tap strikes again. But Noah's drive, his push, his motor motivates that team more than I think any other player in the NBA. I don't know that there's another player not named LeBron James who helps dictate a pace and momentum more than he does because it's so infectious. The guy was playing with plantar fasciitis, which is also going to push what I'm talking about here, because I know that Dwight Howard was playing with the injured shoulder. I get that. You could tell that it was affecting him, but there's so many other manners that a big man can affect a game that doesn't require him to be a dominant offensive presence. And Dwight Howard lacked that for whatever reason, and Noah and Gasol don't. Those guys affect the game all the time. If they're on the floor within a 24-second shot clock, I feel pretty confident that they're going to do something that's going to make me feel good. So long, Howard was such an imposing physical presence. And I don't know if it was the injury, if it was the apathy, if it was the unhappiness, whatever it was, but the eye test tells me people weren't scared to drive on him. He was no longer, if he had been the 3-time defensive player of the year that he was prior, that Lakers team at least does something. Tony Parker doesn't get to the basket anytime he wants to. And now, I know that it's not fair to put all of that on him. The Lakers got a lot of problems. A lot of problems. In fact, probably far more than everybody knows. But, that seems to be an LA thing right now. What team in LA doesn't have a lot of problems? But if I put Joakim Noah on the Lakers, they're going to win a game against the Spurs. They're going to win 2 games against the Spurs. They might push the Spurs a little bit, even without Kobe, because of the way that he can actually affect how everything is done defensively. Howard, all of a sudden, he went from being a guy that was one of the best help side defenders in the NBA to not only being a not good help side defender, he wasn't a good on-ball defender. Guys were able to score on him on the block. That should not happen with that guy. He is way too physically talented. He is far and away the most physically talented big man we've seen since Shaquille O'Neal. And Shaquille O'Neal was the most physically talented big man we had seen since, maybe Bill Russell? We're talking about 2 guys. This is a 40-year time span that these 2 guys are covering. And for whatever Shaq lacked, he was a horrible free throw shooter. He was obviously a bit of a ham. He was a bit of a megalomaniac. He competed. He always competed. In the playoffs, I could write Shaq down for 28 and 15. Hartman, I know you're happy to hear this. I can't write Dwight Howard down for that. His numbers are down in the postseason every single year but one. The only season that he scored more in the playoffs than he did in the regular season. Every other year he scores less. Whereas Marc Gasol, and now granted it's in limited appearances, has been up both years. if my big man is supposed to be the best player on the floor, which a lot of teams aren't structured that way, Memphis is, and maybe Gasol's not their go-to guy, although if you watch him right now, he is. Noah's definitely not the go-to guy, but he's the motor that drives Vessel. I mean, he's the guy that gets them going. He's not the only guy. I mean, truth be told, you could roll Tim Thibodeau out with a bunch of sixth grade girls, and I think he might be able to win you 6 games. That guy's amazing. He might be the best coach in the NBA right now. Greg Popovich, Spoelstra, they're on the conversation. I think Doc Rivers is a little bit overrated, but very good. Don't get me wrong. But, I mean, does Dwight Howard make other players better? Or does Dwight Howard do what's best for Dwight Howard? And on that note, let's talk about what he's done to the teams that he's been with. He left Orlando kind of hanging in the dust. Orlando had to make a horrible deal just to try to get some recompense. I don't know what Orlando was doing, but Otis Smith might. Shout out to Gary St. Jean in that conversation as well, but that's a whole nother story. But Howard has this tendency